When a game makes a good first impression on me, it usually goes one of two ways. Either I stick with it until the end and see what the whole thing has to offer, or I get distracted because of my ADHD and move on to something else, my interest in the thing withering and dying like a plant left on water. Eastward has thankfully so far ended up being in the latter in this instance. Developed by Shanghai-based independent studio Pixpill and published by Chucklefish, whose publishing catalog includes standouts such as Time Spinner, Wargroove, Starbound, Stardew Valley, and the original Risk of Rain. God damn, what a list of bangers. Eastward is a game that both wears its influences on its sleeves and has a lot of its own ideas that it brings to the table. You start off with this text crawl that tells of the most fantasy of fantasy story type setups, only for it to be the setup of a fictional in-universe Japanese RPG that is heavily inspired by Dragon Quest and roguelikes that is being played by a bunch of kids. One of these kids is Sam, a lovely bundle of joy and one of our two protagonists. After the other kids go to school, she runs home to make sure that John, her silent surrogate father figure and the other protagonist of our story, isn't late for his day job as a digger. From there follows a decently sized tutorial that lasts the rest of the prologue and most of the first two chapters of the story. The general vibe that I get from this section reminds me a lot of the first episode of Gurren Lagann, mainly because you play as a digger in an underground village that is taught by their jerk of a mayor to fear the surface with every fiber of their being, alongside the rest of the village that inhabits this place, and the one wonderfully precocious youngster that is determined to see the surface in all of its glory. As a means of world building and showing off how intriguing and at times incredibly dangerous this setting is, Eastward knocks it out of the goddamn park. The game's tutorial dungeon, which is John clearing out the nests of slime-like slugs that have the capacity to become electrified when near down to power lines, is a nice microcosm for some of the dangers that the game can throw at you, while also still guiding you along. It also does a good job of highlighting how the dungeon structure in Eastward works. You go through a small maze-like area, you fight monsters, get a possible new item/ability, do some puzzles with it, fight a boss, and Bob's your uncle. It's evocative of the best of the 2D Zelda games in terms of its overall structure and pacing, using that along with some curveballs to puzzles to get you through some truly cool-looking areas and set pieces. So far, my favorite puzzle has to be Sam and John getting separated and having to navigate parallel paths while using their items and abilities to make it through safe to the other side to traverse. It's really cool. John and Sam are also a great duo in that while they have a lovely father-daughter relationship, they can also kick ass together and separately. To start, John has access to a frying pan that he can use as a melee weapon, and later gains access to bombs of several varieties and a couple of guns, all of which can be upgraded to increase their efficacy. Sam is different because she has what can only be described as magic powers in the form of a bubble that can illuminate dim areas and can also be charged into a stunning blast. Doing so takes up a blue energy meter that recharges over time and can be used to weaken enemies, so that way John can bash them with his frying pan or shoot them with his firearms or blow them up with his bombs. It's a nice little accent to his abilities, and it's a great combination for the two. This also weirdly gets me thinking about how John's frying pan is also used in the game's cooking mechanic, and I'm going to stop primarily because if you think about it for longer than 5 seconds, it gets kind of unsanitary. If you've been watching this video, then you'll no doubt realize that Eastward is absolutely gorgeous. The 2D art on display for the environments in particular is some of the best I've seen in recent memory. The use of lighting in the various areas you run through, particularly in the early game, is stunning as well. It highlights the natural beauty of these areas when combined with the environments and how those are laid out with the debris of old buildings and broken down vehicles to really sell this game's version of the post-apocalypse. It might be tied with the Mojave Wasteland in Fallout New Vegas, or the various locales in Destiny, the Last City, the Farm, the Dreaming City in particular, for my favorite looking post-apocalypses in video games. Oh, and I forgot to mention, remember that faux JRPG from way back in the beginning of this? It's essentially a game within a game. It's a miniature roguelike RPG that's accessible in towns with a TV and game console outside of a shop, where you go around the various parts of that minigame's map to recruit other party members and level them up to make sure you can kill the Great Demon King in around a week in that game's time frame, and you getting wiped out in a battle or running out of time resets the game. but it lets you keep whatever experience and money you had in between attempts, and also has in-universe amiibos. Yes, in-universe amiibos net you items that increase your odds of survival, and so on and so forth. It's probably the most ambitious minigame I think I've ever played in a video game. They didn't have to go that hard, but I deeply appreciate that they did. Thumbs up. All in all, Eastward is a nice little video game that creates a compelling world, brings the player in, and keeps them there with good narrative, characters, and gameplay. I almost regret not playing this one sooner, and I highly recommend that you play this as soon as you can. Don't let it pass you by.